Sure. Do I need to turn the mic on, or can I just talk?
Would it be
Is
helpful
it okay?
to turn the light on or the mic on? Yeah?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes?
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Is it on? Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. So can I tell you, I'm super excited to be here. I saw a lot of folks in the hallway having really great discussions, talking about some of the sessions that they had opportunity to attend this morning. And I'm sorry I missed it, but I came up from DC. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit about myself to help frame a few things that I'd like to say. So I actually started my educational career in DC public schools. I came to Washington, D.C. working for Amazon.com, and I had this crazy idea that I really wanted to save the world, that it really wasn't about making money. So I threw away my dreams of being a technology lobbyist and went to business school to embark on a career in education. Now, some of you may scratch your head and say, why in the world would you go to business school to embark on a career in education? So I had this burning hunch that if I could use my business acumen and strategy, I could help fix some of the fiscal and compliance and all of that messy, dirty, really unimportant work that tends to cloud education. And then I could let the real work happen, which is learning in the classroom. And so I knew, and I just believed that someone would welcome me with a seat at the table in terms of education reform. So I joined DC Public Schools, and I often say I grew up at DCPS, and they raised me. I had the most profound lesson of my life in terms of education. I went in thinking that I was going to go in and change education, but it changed me. It taught me that you needed more than business acumen than to improve education, and that really all of our respect and deference should go to educators. And so I learned quickly that in order for me to walk the walk, I had to talk the talk as well, or talk the talk and walk the walk, and I need to go back to basics. And so from there on, it kind of propelled my education career, and had an opportunity to get my doctorate and spend some time teaching both as an adjunct and a long-term substitute middle school teacher in Prince George's County for a couple of years, up into where I landed a position as the Chief Operating Officer for the State Education Office. And the District of Columbia was on high risk. And so we'd hear all these crazy stories about low-income students and how they were not being successful and all mismanagement. And so I was able to help lead the effort to have District of Columbia exit high risk. But I learned, and I'm going to get to the point, there were three things that I learned, and this has to do with this whole idea of a multi-level approach of meeting the diverse needs of students in urban districts. So my value add to this is really the impact on policy to programs, because there are a lot of folks that sit in a fancy building, maybe at a district office or a state education office, that make decisions but don't have the context, which is really important. Because can you imagine there were a lot of people who didn't have the epiphany like I did, who didn't go back to basics after getting my MBA to go on and go back to the classroom. So there are a lot of people who were like me that are sitting in offices right now that are creating policy, but they don't have the context. Now, they don't got the cultural competency either, but I'm not going to bell hook y'all today. I don't know if y'all ready for that. I might have to come back and have another conversation about the cultural competency piece. But there are three things I want to talk to you about that I think are happening right now in education that are important for you, one, to be aware of, so you can kind of arm yourself and navigate around it in terms of policy and practice. And then two, so you could strategize. So the first has to do with data. Every time I turn around, I got someone selling me a book or someone selling me a training on data. And data that are trainings that help educators differentiate instruction and look at the data. I want to warn you all, don't fall for the okey doke when it comes to data. And hear me out. There's some context that's missing around data that a lot of folks don't understand from a policy perspective. In my current position as Chief Strategy Officer, I lead the district strategy on, I like to call them opportunity youth or disengaged youth, but youth that are not academically engaged in school. So in other words, they've dropped out. People may not realize that we have some youth that have been disengaged from school, but they're just sitting in a chair in the classroom. They're still showing up, but they're disengaged. They haven't even reached the point of stopping to it, and they're truant. Some young people are truant, and yes, we call them disengaged, but there are some young people that are sitting in our classrooms today that are also disengaged. Do not fall for the okie doke when it comes to data. Policymakers are using data in a way to help drive their decisions, so they say. But especially in urban school districts and low-income school districts, a lot of the families and young people, which the data is actually being reported about, don't know that it's being reported, don't know how it's being used, and don't understand the data. It's our jobs as educators to put some context around the data. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen nearly enough. Don't fall for the okie doke. Anytime you have an opportunity, especially at venues like this, let's make sure that we do what we need to do as educators to give context to the data. Our young people are more than just statistics and numbers. We all know what the socioeconomic background of the young people that we work with every day, but there's a cultural context piece that's missing. I used to oversee the National School Lunch Program for the District of Columbia, and what people didn't, every year we get an award as the #1 place in the summer to serve summer meals, and people would get excited and they say, "How'd you do it?" And I would say, "Stop. What you don't understand is that there are more children that are accessing our food services because they don't have food and they live in poverty." I don't celebrate being #1, right? Like, let's be honest. That's not necessarily something to celebrate, but people are celebrating. Don't fall for the okie doke. When you see data and reports that come out from your district, talk to your youth, talk to your students, give them the context, and let them know it is a statistic and it might be something that's on a report, but they are greater than that piece of, than that data. So I think it's our job as educators to provide context. I don't think it's happening in a way that we should, and I think that will impact, data is certainly impacting policy right now, but in terms of the transfer of practice, don't fall for the okie doke. The second is, and I'm going to stick to data, let's have grounded discussions that are affirmative in tone about what that data looks like and that data means. See, what a lot of folks don't realize is that not only are there policy implications, there's funding implications, which is probably the biggest, it may be the elephant in the room, but for folks like me that are policymakers and decision makers, people are making decisions today about how much funding your classroom, your school, your district is going to get from data. Our families have to understand what this means. We have to teach our students and families to be advocates, not just for themselves, but for our school communities. Let's make sure as educators that we're responsible in sharing what that means. So when it comes time to funding, that we make sure that there's some equity in our funding. The next thing has to do with strategy and having a real, honest, and authentic discussion about youth that are disengaged from schools and have stopped attending or truant and have dropped out of school. Just because a young person has dropped out from school does not mean that their strategy for success is to go to a job training program or to pick up a trade. That is a misconception, people. It is our jobs as educators to capture the young people who are sitting in our classrooms today that are disengaged before they stop attending. And we've got to be honest and have a real strategy about how we can support these young people. I would venture to guess that if we included the people in the classrooms who are mentally checked out, that are struggling with mental illness, that have social issues, that are disengaged from what's happening in the classroom today, that number of disengaged youth is probably a lot larger than what we realize. But we've got to have a real strategy, and it doesn't mean when they stop attending school. It doesn't mean that they can't go on to graduate from high school. I'm sorry, folks, but GED is not the only option. You can go back and get a high school diploma, and there are different ways to get a high school diploma as well. We just have to have an honest conversation about youth disengagement, and we have to be real. And it might be ugly and nasty and full of tears and snot and crying and scary, but we have to get real because our young people are suffering, and that disengagement is happening right now. It does not mean it's happening with a student that's truant, but we've got to have a real strategy and an authentic strategy about it. So those are just my few things that I think that are happening right now in terms of policy that I think is also, that could also inform practice. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to pass the mic.